Sir James Paul McCartney, founder of the British rock band The Beatles, was born in 1942 in a maternity hospital in the suburbs of Liverpool. His mother Mary was working at the time as a nurse at the clinic, later taking up a new position as a home midwife. The boy's father James McCartney was Irish by nationality, and during the war was a gunsmith in a war factory. With the end of hostilities he became a cotton merchant. At the age of 5 Paul entered a Liverpool school. Here, at the age of 10, he took part in his first concert and received an award, and a year later he was transferred to a secondary school, which was called the Liverpool Institute, where he studied until his 17th birthday. In 1956, the McCartney family suffered a severe loss. His mother Mary died of breast cancer. After her death, Paul withdrew into himself. The way out for him was music. Thanks to his father's support, the boy learned to play the guitar and wrote his first musical compositions. It was this sad fact of the musician's biography that largely influenced his rapprochement with John Lennon, who also lost his mother in his youth. In 1957, a significant first meeting of the future founders of the Beatles took place. Paul McCartney's school friend invited him to try himself in a youth band called the Quarrymen, whose founder was Lennon. At that time John was still not very good at playing the guitar, and Paul was happy to share his knowledge with his new friend. The relatives of both teenagers took the budding strong youthful friendship in stride. But this did not affect the young people's relationship, and they continued to compose music together. Paul McCartney invited George Harrison, who would later become one of the members of the legendary Beatles quartet, to join the Quarrymen. By 1960, the young musical group was already performing at venues in Liverpool. Paul and John changed their former name to the more sonorous The Silver Beatles, which was shortened to The Beatles after a tour to Hamburg. The first songs that caused a storm of uncontrollable emotions in the audience were Long Tall Sally and My Bonnie. Despite this, the recording of the first disc in Decca Records' studio failed, and after a tour to Germany, the music group signed a second contract with Parlophone Records label. At the same time, a fourth legendary member Ringo Starr appeared in the quartet, and Paul McCartney himself changed from rhythm guitar to bass guitar. Within 2 years, the band's first hits, Love Me Do and How Do You Do It, which were written entirely by Paul McCartney, appeared. From the first singles, the young man showed himself to be an established musician, and his advice was heeded by all the band members. From the very beginning, the band's image was different from other musical groups of the time. The musicians were focused on their work, they looked like real intellectuals. And if in the first albums John and Paul composed compositions on their own, later they came to co-creation. In 1963, the single She Loves You topped the UK popular music charts and stayed at the top for almost 2 months. This fact officially secured the status of the most popular band. 1964 was a breakthrough year for the Beatles on the world stage. The musicians went on tour in Europe and then travelled to the USA. The quartet was greeted by crowds of fans, and at their concerts the fans threw real tantrums. The Beatles finally conquered the USA after their performance on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was watched by more than 70 million viewers. In many ways, Paul's dismissal from the band's affairs was influenced by the difference in the musicians' philosophical views. In addition, the appointment of the dubious Alan Klein as the band's manager, who was opposed by McCartney alone, finally split the band. On the eve of his departure from the Beatles, McCartney created several immortal singles, Hey Jude, Back in the USSR, and Helter Skelter, which were included in the song list of the White Album. The cover of the latter had a special design. It was completely white, without any photos. Interestingly, it is the only record in the world that entered the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest-selling record. The last album, Let It Be, was the final album of Paul McCartney's work with the quartet. In 1971, thanks largely to his wife, Paul began a solo career. The first Wings album, which was produced by the Philadelphia Orchestra, reached #1 on the UK charts and #2 in the US, and the duet between Paul and Linda McCartney was named the best in their home country. McCartney's former colleagues were negative about the musician's new experience, but Paul continued to compose songs for a duet with his wife. The supergroup also included famous British musicians Denny Laine and Danny Saville. Several times after that, Paul and John participated in joint concerts. They maintained a quiet friendship until Lennon's death, which occurred in 1980. A year after the death of his friend, Paul stopped his musical activities as a member of the band Wings for fear of being killed like Lennon. With this band, Paul managed to release the album Band on the Run, which became their most successful project. After Paul McCartney released the album Tug of War, which is considered the best disc in the singer's solo career, the musician acquired several old estates for his family and built a personal music studio in his mansion. In the 80s and 90s, Paul McCartney recorded many collaborations with other famous artists such as Tina Turner, Elton John, Eric Stewart. Paul experimented with arrangements, often recording songs accompanied by the London Orchestra. The musician's oeuvre is a combination of flops and hits. In his youth, the musician's personal life was turbulent. His first serious love met him in 1959. A couple of years later, Ron even got pregnant by Paul, and the lovers actively planned a wedding. But the girl had a miscarriage, after which the relationship between them gradually came to naught. McCartney met Jane Asher in 1963. Communication with her greatly influenced the musician's worldview. The girl was a sought-after actress, despite her young age, and often went on tour. During the 5 years during which the love affair lasted, Paul McCartney became close to Jane's parents, who occupied a special position in the high society of London. The young man settled in the penthouse of the 6-story Asher mansion. Together with Jane McCartney's family, he attended avant-garde theatre performances, got acquainted with modern musical trends and listened to the classics. At this time, Paul created some of his most famous works, Yesterday and Michelle. Gradually, the musician distanced himself from his bandmates. He devoted all his leisure time to communicating with the owners of famous art galleries and became the main buyer in the shop of books dedicated to the study of psychedelics. After parting with Jane Asher, which occurred on the eve of their wedding due to Paul's infidelity, the musician was left alone, but soon met a girl who became his first wife. Linda Eastman was 1 year older than McCartney and worked as a photographer. With his wife and her daughter Heather from his first marriage, Paul McCartney settled in a small mansion in the countryside and began to lead a rather secluded life. Paul and Linda McCartney had 3 children in their marriage, daughters Mary and Stella, and son James. In 1997, he was awarded an English knighthood and became Sir Paul McCartney. A year later, the singer suffered a great tragedy. His wife Linda McCartney died of cancer. After a while, the musician found solace in the arms of former model Heather Mills, not forgetting his first wife. In her honor, he created an album, released a film with pictures and photo works of Linda. The proceeds from the sale of the discs went to donations for the treatment of cancer patients. In 2001, he learned that he had lost another of his old friends, George Harrison. But the bitterness of Paul McCartney's losses was brightened by the appearance of his third daughter Beatrice Millie in 2003. The girl gave hope to her father, and he got a second breath for creativity. However, the appearance of a child did not save this marriage. In 2006, the divorce process began, and only 2 years later the relationship was officially dissolved. According to the court decision, the musician paid the former spouse about $34 million. In 2007, the musician began dating Nancy Chevelle, an American businesswoman. The woman did not need money, unlike the singer's second wife Heather. After 4 years spent together, the lovers got married. In April 2022, McCartney started a big tour. He went on a world tour called Got Back. At the first concert, Paul showed an amazing spectacle, performing the hit I've Got a Feeling together with John Lennon on the big screen. The audience was delighted with such a duet. At the same time, it was announced that the ex-soloist of the Beatles would attend the Glastonbury Festival as a headliner. Given the singer's age, 80, this automatically made him the oldest participant in the event's history.